My name is Jason, and everything about my life was supposed to be perfect. At least, that's what everyone thought. From the outside, Susan and I had it all. We'd been married for 6 years, lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, and were finally talking about starting a family. If you looked at us, you'd think we were the poster couple for happiness. But behind the smiles and the white picket fence, things were starting to feel off. I remember the first time we talked about having kids. It was a quiet evening in our living room, the kind of night where the world outside just seemed to slow down. We were sitting on the couch, Susan's head on my shoulder, both of us wrapped in the warmth of a shared moment. We'd been through a lot together. Susan had always been the steady, calming force in my life, and I tried to be the same for her. So when she told me she was ready to start a family, it felt like the natural next step. "I think we're ready, don't you?" she asked, her voice full of hope. I could see the excitement in her eyes. And I felt it too. The thought of having a child together, of building something bigger than ourselves, was thrilling. It was the kind of dream I never thought I'd have, but here it was. This was the final piece in our life puzzle. I took her hand, squeezing it. "Yeah, I think we are." And just like that, the plan was set. We'd talked about it 100 times before, but now it felt different. More real. Susan was ready, and so was I. Despite my job keeping me on the road more often than not, I told myself that I could handle it. We could handle it. Things started to fall into place. We began redecorating the guest room, turning it into a nursery. I adjusted my work schedule, taking more time off to be home. Even when work got hectic and I had to travel for days on end, I made sure to stay connected, calling her every night before bed. We'd even started to pick out names, though we couldn't quite settle on one. The day Susan told me she was pregnant, I nearly lost it. The way she told me was sweet, the kind of thing you see in movies. I'd just come back from a week-long trip, and as soon as I stepped through the door, she handed me a small gift. It was wrapped in a soft pink ribbon. Inside was a tiny onesie, the kind you'd buy for a newborn. It had Dad's #1 fan printed on it in bold, cheerful letters. I stared at it, confused at first. Then it hit me. "You're pregnant?" I asked, my voice breaking. I didn't even know what to say. Susan smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "I've been trying to tell you all week. I wanted it to be a surprise." I pulled her close, my heart racing. I could feel the excitement building inside me, like a tidal wave. This was it. This was the dream we'd talked about. This was the next chapter in our perfect life. I promised myself that I'd be the best father, the best husband. I'd make sure our family was everything we ever dreamed of. But there were things, small things, that neither of us really acknowledged. I was gone a lot for work, and Susan, despite being the incredible woman she was, couldn't help but feel lonely at times. I knew it, but I thought we were strong enough to weather it. Our love was enough to make everything work. And when she told me she was pregnant, I thought, this is it. This is the final piece. There was nothing that could tear us apart. I didn't know, back then, that things were already starting to shift beneath the surface. I didn't know that the cracks in our perfect illusion were just beginning to show. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint rustle of nurses outside. Susan lay in the bed, looking exhausted but elated, her face glowing as she cradled our newborn daughter, Connie. I was sitting next to her, my heart full as I watched Susan gently nurse Connie. It was a sight I had dreamed about for months, and now, here it was, a reality. I leaned over and kissed Susan's forehead. "You're amazing," I whispered. She smiled, a small, tired smile, but it was enough to make my chest swell with pride. This was everything we had talked about. This was the culmination of our perfect life. Connie was here, our little girl, and our family was complete. But even as I held Susan's hand, a nagging thought began to worm its way into my mind. It started small, just a whisper at the edge of my consciousness. A flicker of doubt that I couldn't shake. I had been here before, had I not? So many nights away for work, too many missed moments. Susan had been so strong through the pregnancy, and I had been there for the big moments. But what about all the little things? Could I make up for those? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. Everything was fine. I was home now. I was going to be the father she needed. I had promised her that. The door to the room opened, and a nurse entered, holding a clipboard. She smiled at us, her eyes warm. "Just need to check on a few things, and then we'll get the paperwork started," she said, her voice gentle. I nodded, and Susan smiled in return, still gazing down at Connie. It was such a beautiful moment. Everything seemed perfect. But then the woman from the administration stepped in behind the nurse. Miss Jenkins. I recognized her from when I'd arrived earlier. She had been the one to go over some of the hospital's policies with us. Now she was holding the birth certificate paperwork, ready to get our signatures. We just need a few details to finalize the birth certificate, she said with a smile, walking toward the bed. I looked at her, distracted for a moment by how tired I was, how overwhelmed by the sheer joy of becoming a father. It all felt so unreal. But as I turned my head back to Susan, I felt a strange sense of unease. A quiet voice inside me began to ask questions I didn't want to hear. I watched Susan for a moment longer, watching how she tenderly adjusted Connie in her arms. And then the thought crossed my mind. What if she wasn't really mine? The voice in my head mocked me for the thought, but I couldn't help it. It was there. It was like a shadow hovering just out of reach, something I couldn't shake. The room felt smaller. The air seemed heavier. Miss Jenkins was speaking to Susan, but all I could hear was the thudding of my own heartbeat. Jason. Susan's voice broke through the fog in my mind. Jason, are you okay? I blinked, suddenly aware that everyone in the room was looking at me. Miss Jenkins had a confused expression on her face, while the nurse was still standing by the door, waiting for something. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. I looked at the paperwork Miss Jenkins was holding in her hands,